Thank you everybody for joining this session. This session will work a little differently than some of the others you've seen. Instead of demonstrating a fintech product, we'll actually be looking at a methodology we've created at Praxent to help measure the effectiveness of fintech product development teams, identify process bottlenecks, and then ultimately eliminate those bottlenecks. So I'm really excited to dive in with you. Before I do, I thought I'd briefly introduce our organization and myself. So I'm the managing partner at Praxent, and what we do at Praxent is actually design, build, and implement digital products in the banking, wealth management, and insurance space. So in practice, that looks like fintech products, wealth tech products, and insurtech products. And we're working with those companies, again, to design them, to help them build them, and then ultimately to help them integrate those products within financial institutions. My personal responsibility at the company is overseeing the delivery of all of our engagements. And my professional background is as an enterprise custom software developer and architect. Been doing that kind of work for about 25 years and worked with about 300 organizations over the course of that career. Diving in, the kinds of companies Praxent serves are typically in one of four stages of their growth. We work with some companies that are looking to launch their product to market. And often what they're trying to accomplish is an initial product market fit, developing a custom or compelling customer experience, and then setting up a scalable architecture. We work with some companies that are just past that stage, have maybe one or two FI customers, but are still looking to further achieve traction in the market. And what we're seeing increasingly are companies that are really taking off in the fintech space. And we see this as a result of the digitization of the banking space. Obviously, the pandemic has helped to accelerate that trend. And what we're seeing in a lot of cases is that those organizations are struggling to fully capitalize on the opportunities in front of them. They're really working to reduce their time to revenue on new features they're building. They're trying to integrate their product with others in the space, cores, auxiliary fintech products, and they're looking to generate scalable delivery processes. Often these companies are growing very quickly. They're adding engineers, they're adding UX designers, project managers, QA analysts, and they're really trying to scale a process that they used to get to market where they were scrappy and where that may no longer be effective for them as they're doubling, tripling, quadrupling the size of their team. And so that's what we'll really dive into today, is understanding how to measure those processes and then ultimately how to make them more effective over time. One question that we often get asked and that we often challenge our clients with is, are you getting productivity from your team commensurate with the investments you're making in product development? And so especially as you're growing out a team, often that team can represent one of the largest investments you're making in addition to sales and marketing and potentially compliance. And so we want to, work with our clients to understand that if you're not, why aren't you not getting that productivity that you expect from the team? And this is where we can really help to better understand why that would be. One leading cause that probably everybody on this session is familiar with for not getting that productivity is technical debt. And this is a really succinct definition I found online. It was published by somebody named Arif Kassam, who's a CTO at NewODB, who's a Temenos partner. And what he said, I'll read it here, is the technical debt is a tax on agility, productivity, and adaptability that builds up over time. So this is essentially the sand in the gears that can eventually slow down or even completely stop a successful product development team. And one of the things we've seen in our 21 years in business is that there are really two types of this technical debt. There's technical debt that you actively manage and use to your advantage to help you get to market. And then there's technical debt that sort of spirals out of control because you do not proactively control it. And of course, this can be unhealthy and can lead to all kinds of negative outcomes, particularly as it pertains to the productivity of your team. Looking at this in a little greater depth, the managed technical debt is really a balance of shortcuts you've taken to get to market quickly and also proactive investments and process improvements to manage that technical debt. And so this is a push and pull that ultimately means that as you're investing in new product features, the vast majority of that investment is actually going toward value-added features and functionality for your product. The very small minority in this case goes to paying off technical debt. So in practice, paying off technical debt means that you're spending extra time in analysis, you're spending extra time QAing the product, resolving defects, that kind of thing. And by using strong processes, you can limit the amount of time you're doing that while still taking shortcuts where you need to get to market quickly and stay competitive and take advantage of market opportunities. So this is really what we're hoping to achieve, not zero technical debt, but a manageable level of technical debt, similar to how companies manage financial debt, where it can be advantageous as long as it's not all-consuming and doesn't get out of control. The contrary to that would be uncontrolled technical debt. What you can see here is that over time, you'll actually find that you're spending more and more in budget on your product as it's growing and as you're gaining market adoption, but less and less of that budget over time is actually going to value-added features, and more of it is going to some of these less productive activities that I mentioned a moment ago. And so this is, of course, what we're trying to prevent. And the challenge really is when you get in this circumstance, it is very difficult to reverse course without investing a ton of budget in resolving that technical debt and essentially delaying almost all other feature development to do so. And that's a pretty difficult sell, frankly, to make with executives. And it's just not a place you want to get to. And so the key is to be more proactive. In cases where we work with clients that find themselves in this position, it's almost always as the result of a lack of process maturity in one or more of 6 areas. And those areas specifically are alignment, product design, architecture, development, quality assurance, and knowledge management. So we can dive into those in a little greater detail to understand each in turn and why a lack of process in each would lead to a significant lack of productivity from your product development team. So looking into those, the first is product and technology alignment. So what we mean here really is that there are typically 2 head leaders for a technology or a product initiative. The first is a product leader that's looking at the business value to an organization's clients typically for a piece of technology for a fintech product. And they're really understanding what the consumer needs are, what the end user needs are, and aligning that with a product roadmap. Technology leaders, on the other hand, are looking at how to actually build that technology from a software perspective and to a certain extent from a user experience perspective as well. And in some cases, those folks aren't really rowing in the same direction, not from a malicious standpoint, but they both may have different priorities and perspectives on how to proceed. And to the extent that they're not aligned, is to the extent there could be a lot of inefficiencies implemented in or introduced into the process. Another one that's interesting that you wouldn't think of as affecting productivity is user-centered design. So obviously this is about making the product user-friendly, aligned to an end user's needs. But a lack of focus can also, in this area, can also lead to lack of productivity because specifically it can lead to rework. So what you could find is that if you don't build a feature to gain approval internally from product or a feature that doesn't ultimately gain adoption, then what could happen is you may have to rebuild that feature 2 or 3 or 4 times. Specifically, the challenge with that is not only are you rebuilding the feature, but you're also structurally moving the code around in ways that could make it more brittle. So if you think about, for example, a building, if you had to move a wall around internally in that building, there could be invisible damage that's caused to the structure of that building. And it's no different with software code bases. And so if we can get the design 70, 80, 90% right the first time around, that's advantageous. One that a lot of people recognize as important is software architecture. So Neil Ford at ThoughtWorks has talked about software architecture as being all the things in your software product that are hard to change. And so, of course, we want to get those architecture decisions right, because if we need to change them, by definition, they'll be expensive, time-consuming, and potentially disruptive to update. Software development best practices are an interesting view of productivity. Often as software team will look at improving the productivity of an end user or a client, but they won't necessarily reflect those same goals of automation, for example, internally on themselves. And so software development best practices ensure there's automation in source control management, in release management, in quality assurance, and in a number of other areas, local environment setup, so that the software developers are focused more on end feature development instead of manual processes on their end. Quality assurance is an interesting perspective. the reason quality assurance is important to monitor from a productivity standpoint is that the longer a defect is allowed to exist, the more expensive it becomes to address. So if a software defect ultimately makes it to a second or third developer's computers, that becomes more expensive. If it's discovered by QA, that becomes even more expensive. If it's discovered by a business stakeholder, even more expensive. A lot of times that results in a difficult conversation between product and engineering. And if it's discovered by an end user, that's the most expensive to resolve because there could be real world mitigations that have to be taken, could be legal risk, could be compliance risk. So ultimately, we want to address quality issues as quickly as we can, identify them and fix them. And a big part of that solution is automated quality assurance. And then finally, knowledge management is about what happens if a key member of your team leaves the organization or is promoted. We want to make sure that there is shared knowledge of the platform across the team so that a team is prepared to take on changes in staff, which are not a matter of if, but really are a matter of when. So when we look at these issues and as we solve these issues internally at Praxent, we built an assessment called the Codepath Assessment that looks at all 6 of these areas and helps us understand across our portfolio of fintech and wealth tech products that we're building, how we're doing to manage our processes in each of these areas. And the way it's specifically set up is as a 55-question survey where you can get anywhere from a 0-point score up to a 120-point score for a product development initiative. You can see one of the areas here highlighted is source control management. So, for example, on this one question, if your source control is stored in a distributed version control system, such as Git, with a well-accepted branching strategy, such as Git Flow, then you'll get a 2-point score on this one. And so you'll be on your way to achieving that 120-point score. We've never found an organization that got a perfect 120 points, but something on the higher end of that, for example, from 90 to 120, it's going to be a very healthy, productive product development team. And this is what we're shooting for. Something on the lower end is going to be a team that's spending the vast majority of its time addressing technical debt issues, as we discussed prior, instead of productive feature development. If you'd like to download a copy of the Codepath Assessment, you can find a link here on the screen, download it directly from our website. So that's it for the Codepath Assessment. If you'd like to learn more about it, we're actually conducting a workshop as part of the FinDEVr event. And specifically what we'll be doing during the workshop is talking about this Codepath process, providing additional guidance on identifying process bottlenecks and resolving them through the lens of Codepath. The part that I'm most excited about within the context of the workshop is we'll also be doing live surveys of everybody that participates in that workshop so that we can understand across our organizations how we benchmark against other firms as it pertains to our maturity in these 6 areas. So what we'll do is we'll ask people to rate their conformance to these processes on a scale of 1 to 5. And then it'll all be anonymous. So hopefully people will feel comfortable being candid so that you can really get some real value in understanding where you stand relative to your peers in the space. The other thing we'll be doing, which will be equally beneficial, is we'll be asking people to share insights on the specific challenges they face in each of these 6 areas and some of the best practices they've identified, pro tips, hard-won lessons that we can all benefit from during the workshop. I really hope you're able to participate in the workshop. The more people who participate, the more interesting our survey results and our insights will be. Thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to seeing you at the event.